Hello, I'm so glad you've been able to join me today for another inspirational meeting with two extraordinary women. I'll introduce you in a moment. I'm Anne Diamond, joining you from Britain, just north of London and a little south of Oxford. And I know there are people watching right now from all over the world, so it's a huge pleasure to be live streaming to you right now. As you're watching, you're probably someone who's already sailed with Viking, or maybe you've even booked a future cruise, and we are all looking forward so much to being together again and able to holiday and explore. Well, let me bring you some, as they say, breaking news. Just a few hours ago, Viking's new ocean cruise ship, the Venus, was floated out from dry dock. Now, in the shipping world, it's like a birth. There's even a cutting of the cord. The boat is, of course, built in dry dock, and then on a hugely symbolic day, when they let the water in and it floats, there you go, they're blessing it, that's when a new ship starts its true destiny. And so it was today for that Viking Venus. Looks magnificent already, doesn't it? Hopefully early next year, the Viking Venus will spend her maiden season sailing itineraries in the Mediterranean and in Northern Europe. The traditional float-out ceremony took place at Fincantieri's Ancona shipyard. It takes about 2 days, apparently, to float the boat. And then the Viking Venus will be moved to a nearby outfitting dock for final construction and interior build out. You can see how much like a birth it is, really, can't you? Like I said, there's even a cutting of the cord. Of course, because of the global pandemic, it was a much more muted affair than it is usually, but I'm sure that once the ship gets its proper christening, there will be pomp and ceremony and fireworks. Well, today we are meeting two women who grew up literally thousands of miles from each other, but they enjoyed surprisingly similar childhoods, which gave them similar dreams and ended up with them finding each other as what they call soul sisters and embarking together upon a great challenge that has seen them hailed as world pioneers. So this is one, I think we've got a picture of her when she was very little. There you go, there's young Anne with her brother growing up in Minnesota, where I'm told you spend a lot of your childhood in ski suits wrapped up against the cold. And then, oh look, yes, here also, tens of thousands of miles away, just outside Oslo, is a young Liv with her cousin. Also, as you'll notice, very well wrapped up against the elements, but loving their environment and clearly loving the snow. Anne and Liv, surprising then, you may think that these two young women ever found each other. But of course, distance has never been a problem for them. They almost live by the motto, no horizon is too far. In fact, it's the title of their book. And it's the mantra by which they live their lives. Hundreds of miles for them is just a walk in the park. Well, have a look here at what they have accomplished together.
About 35 below.
What an environment, what an accomplishment. So welcome to Liv Arnesen, who joins us from her home just outside Oslo, in Norway, obviously, and Anne Bancroft in her home in Minnesota. It's lovely to speak to you both. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
I know. Is it very frustrating being an explorer in lockdown at the moment? How is it for you at the moment, Liv?
Well, I'm really privileged. I live in the outskirts of Oslo, far above the Oslo fjord, and I can just walk out of my door and with my dog. I'm fine. But, I have 6 grandchildren, so it's, hard to be away and not getting all these bugs. That's the hardest part. But I'm an introvert and I love to read books, so I'm fine, actually.
I find it absolutely amazing that you both say you're introverts, and yet look at what you've done. How is lockdown for you, Anne, where you are?
Well, it's a bit strict. I haven't seen my mother in over 3 months. So like Liv, that's very difficult in terms of family and that physical connection. We all like each other. But I too live on the outskirts, and so I walk right out the door, and if I blinked, I would not notice that anything is different in some ways. But I think the thing that has struck me over the last 3 months of this lockdown is that in a certain way my life hasn't changed, but the open-endedness is very disconcerting. And yes, our work has gone on pause, and being able to know when the next time we can engage and get back to work is a little different. And so in one respect it's wonderful, and in the other respect it's a little unnerving.
I can see that, because actually both of you, in being explorers, in going on great expeditions, there's a lot of preparation and planning and plotting. Like you say, you know how things are meant to go day by day and what your goal is. And the open-endedness of this, I can see that it must be frustrating.
Yeah, plans are on hold, and so we know that it's a pause, but we're anxious to get back to work.
Now, I talked at the very beginning there that when you were youngsters, you obviously loved being outside, you loved your environment. You both had childhood dreams, didn't you? You both had very similar childhoods from that point of view. Liv, first of all, didn't you always want to go up Everest?
No, that was come much later. I read a book about the first man that skied to the South Pole when I was 8 years old. So that's when my idea about the South Pole came. And I loved skiing since I was 3 years old when I got my first skis.
Oh my goodness.
And so people my age, they are just not looking forward to the winters. I love the winters still. So the dream about the South Pole came when I was about 8 years old.
8 years old. Oh, that's still quite young to have those sort of dreams. And were you the same? Did you always feel that you could do whatever you dreamed to do?
Well, we lived in a rural setting, so adventure was right out the back door. And as always, Liv is a little bit ahead of me. I came across a book on my parents' bookshelf of an explorer, Ernest Shackleton, and that's when my world really opened up in terms of dreaming of the far reaches of the globe and wanting to go there. And I think the similarity that the two of us have in part is certainly both growing up skiing and loving the out of doors and finding adventure in books, but we both had parents who nurtured our dreams and really gave us that sense that the world was our oyster. And I think that as young girls, that was really critical in being able to do what we've been able to do in our lives.
Yes, and to continue that message to girls particularly. Liv, why did you call your first book Nice Girls Don't Walk to the South Pole?
Because we at that time we had women as a prime minister. It was the 1990s, and so when I asked for funding, I felt like I moved into the men's last domain in Norway. I shouldn't go there. So I got all these stories. People asked me, "Have you ever pulled a sled, my dear?" And I had been crossing the Greenland ice cap. I've been guiding on Spitsbergen, and I got all these terrible stories from the military service in the wintertime. So, and of course, a lot of men don't really do outdoors camping before they are in the military, and they're not prepared, so they suffer. But I am, starting from very young with my parents, learning step by step. So my main sponsor actually came from Italy. I didn't get any Norwegian sponsors.
You didn't get a sponsor from Norway. Isn't that astonishing?
I got skis and, equipment, but, no, not really the money that is needed for an expedition like that. So,
and that was, of course, when you went solo to the South Pole.
Yeah.
See, there you are.
But on the back side of the book, it says that nice girls go wherever they want.
Well, you found that, and you certainly proved it, absolutely. And Anne, your first polar expedition, you were the only woman in a team of 7 men and 50 male dogs. So maybe you came across a bit of misogyny, or at least old-fashioned attitudes towards women, did you?
Well, of course. But I have to say, I've been so fortunate. I'm still friends with everybody on that team. They were a lot like my brothers, but there was this subtle, and they hate me to talk about this, but there was this subtle undercurrent of a sort of a sexism that society, teaches all of us, male and female. And I learned some wonderful lessons from that. And it's probably by design. I would say that my next expedition in '92 to the South Pole was all women. And then working with Liv these last 20 years, I think there's so much more work to be done for gender equity, and there's no better way to do it sort of than following your own passion and doing what you feel you were meant to do on this earth.
Well, we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but before we leave that expedition, can you tell me about Sam the dog? Because it's a lovely story, and we've got a few photographs.
Well, you're not supposed to have a favorite dog, because I'm a teacher and you're not supposed to have a favorite student either. But Sam was my main man, and he was an outcast dog that joined up with us, a remarkable puller. But the two of us really bonded because we were a little bit on the outside, and I would sneak him some of the terrible food that we were eating, a pemmican, which is a very fatty mixture of meat and fat. And I didn't really particularly care for it, but he loved it. And if I was frustrated, I could bury my frostbitten face into his fur and have a little cry and a little sort of feeling sorry for myself. And I always got just tremendous love back. And so he never shared my secrets, by the way, either. So he was just a marvelous traveling companion.
It's amazing, isn't it? Because he didn't start out as being one of your dogs. He was a sort of stray that you took in, and he turned out to be a really, really good pack dog.
He was a fantastic dog, but the other dogs really resented him. So he was out on the outskirts as well from the group. And so I think we had kinship with each other.
What happened to him? Where did he go after that expedition?
Well, he actually went to the South Pole. He beat me to the South Pole. He went with Will Steger on his international trip in 1990, and then he retired. And so my dream would have been that he would have retired with me, but he found a lovely home, and I went on other expeditions.
So was he a dog who went to both poles?
He was the dog who went to both poles. He's a history maker.
It's pretty remarkable, isn't it? It's interesting you say there that at low times you could bury your head in his fur and have a little cry, and he never gave up your secrets. And you do wonder whether, what is it? You were talking about gender stereotyping. To both of you, is exploring, the sort of exploring you do, is it about physical strength or mental and emotional strength? Liv?
I think everybody can, get strong enough to ski to the poles. But I think to have a good expedition or have feel that you are really in your dream, it's a more mental thing. Because, nothing goes as planned. You have to handle, the bad weather, the crevasses, and, something that happens that were not expected. So I think that's that's a mental thing to be prepared. Yeah, I think the mental thing is the most important. And women also have an advantage because I experienced on many trips with men that we have a little more fat on our body, so we don't get that empty as fast as men when it's really cold and very long distances. So that might be the reason why, because we are supposed to have kids. So I think our body is made to be stronger, and that might also be the mental thing, because I think most I shouldn't generalize, but I think many of my friends, they are mentally very strong that are in sports and expeditions.
Would you agree, Anne?
I think one of the things that was wonderful about the North Pole expedition and having 7 men and myself is I was clearly physically the weakest member, probably. I was definitely the smallest member. And what comes out of that is what Liv has been talking about. It's that mental toughness. It's that desire to really want to be doing what you're doing. And that passion piece is really important. And what came out of that trip is really a demonstration of that, because these trips are not just about physical will, and yet the outdoor arena focuses so much on how much your sled weighs, how many miles you do in each day, and those things are important elements, but they don't drive you. It is that mental toughness that's going to get you sort of to win the day. And I got to see that in really stark realities, because the biggest member of the team on that North Pole team was 6'6", 200 plus pounds. He was actually very inefficient in the cold, a wonderful soul, but he perspired more, he needed more food, and he still couldn't lift our 1,400 pound sled all by himself. We had to do that as a team. And that becomes really the winning lesson out of something that where the ratio is so whack. And so it was a great lesson, and it was a wonderful way to sort of share with the world that reality that I think outdoors people already know.
So there you are in the story, both of you women at sort of different ends of the world doing your thing. What drew you towards each other? How did you meet up? Who discovered whom?
I got a letter from Anne, a letter with a stamp. And I knew about her, of course, because she has skied to or been to the North Pole. I had skied to the South Pole, and at that time I was a high school teacher, and because I was just planned to fulfill my childhood dream and go back to teaching, and then I was asked to go, all around the world to lecture, and then I got this because then I realized that I should do some more, because my students said, why did you ski? And I said I had this dream. And on my way to the South Pole, the last 3 weeks, I started to write a management book for young people. How important to have a dream and to have a sort of a direction in your life. And then I tested it out with my students, and I said, well, to dream, we are too old. They were in high school. And then I got this letter from Anne, asked me if I wanted to cross the Antarctic continent with her and use that expedition sort of to promote or market education and to show that, you can fulfill your dreams. So I remember I saw the letter. Wow.
You believe that very passionately, don't you? Is it not just doing it yourself, but actually inspiring youngsters to do it and having something to say, and both of you were teachers, having something to say to your students. Lovely pictures of you getting yourselves together there for what you were already planning would be crossing the Antarctic.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you train for that? What do you do?
Everything. I think that the silliest thing that we do that is actually a wonderful activity, but is very boring, is to strap 3 car tires together and then get your ski poles out in the summertime. Because if you're traveling to Antarctica, it's the southern hemisphere. So when you're training in the northern hemisphere, you're butting right up against summer and before you leave. So there's no snow to ski and pull sleds. So we do this silly activity for about 4 hours at a shot, and it's that friction when the sort of the rubber meets the road type of thing, and it works every muscle in your body, and it's very important, so you get mentally prepared as well.
Yeah, I mean, what an activity. It looks excruciating. And even the dog looks a bit bored.
Oh, the dog is so bored because we don't go very fast. And, we live in the country, and that's a good thing, because I think otherwise our neighbors would just lock us up. I mean, it's a silly activity.
Well, yes, except that I can see it's extraordinarily good training. But my goodness, you have to really want what you do to do that, don't you?
You do. Now, did you notice, though, that Liv had the bigger tire because she's much stronger than I am?
Yeah, but only one big tire. You had 3, I think.
Yeah, I had 3 little ones. She had the big tractor tire.
And this is, of course, what the real thing looks like. We've got a picture here of, there you are. I mean, that's how big some of the sleds are that you have to pull. Because you don't have dogs anymore, do you?
No, dogs are not allowed in Antarctica anymore since 1991. So you have to do the work yourself.
Why is that?
They don't want animals that don't belong to the continent. So they try to get, all kinds of reindeer and hares and, all kinds of animals that scientists and people brought into the continent.
So basically they're saying if you want to explore, you're going to have to pull everything on your own. And you certainly did do this. There's a lovely video that shows just how difficult it is in the real world to haul a sled. Let's have a look at this now.
Show you a little reality. I weigh I think I was about 125 pounds. This is a 250-pound sled, and I'm trying to get over a speed bump. It's nothing big. They come in all sizes, but the sled is the boss. This is a very dry environment, so you hear the squeaking. Roald Amundsen's talked about the Antarctic ice being like a sandy beach, like sandpaper, because it's a cruel element that holds your sled runners back. So you're not getting that glide that you cross-country skiers so love. It's just a grind. So that would be our 14-hour workday. And somehow we like to do this.
That looked excruciating, but that's fairly flat terrain compared to some of the terrain in some of the videos I've seen you explore.
Well, Antarctica is drier than the Sahara Desert, and I think it was Amundsen who wrote in his journal, the ice feels more like glue. It's like pulling over a sandy beach because there's very little moisture in that old ice and snow. And so it's sort of a dirty trick, because even when it's somewhat flat, not only do you have those little speed bumps, the sastrugies, the ice drifts, but it's just, there isn't a lot of beads of moisture under your sled runners and that ice and snow. And so it makes it just even more difficult some days.
But you did build in one other mode of transport, I suppose. I think you went to a Norwegian woman who makes sails for boats, and you got her to make sails for you so that if there was a good enough wind, it could help drag you along. Did that work?
Yeah, it worked, but when we met the scientists at the South Pole, it was the warmest summer in Antarctica, and it was the first summer they had that little wind. So we sailed a lot, but we had expected to sail much, much more. So it was a lot of pulling.
Did it ever get dangerous? Did you actually ever get lifted up into the air?
Anne did.
We had a little Mary Poppins moment once.
Oh, but it wasn't that nice. It sounds very dangerous.
It You know, if you're going too fast, it's your knees are your shock absorbers, and so some days you feel as if your knees are up in your throat rather than, you know, just scooting along. And other days it was just absolutely fantastic. So I had a love-hate relationship with the sailing. I loved it for the miles or the kilometers that it produced, but my aching knees at the end of the day sometimes weren't very happy.
It's interesting. Whenever we see pictures of you and read about you or watch videos of you, you're always laughing and smiling and putting on this amazingly, brilliantly brave face. There must be dark moments and there must be dangerous moments, aren't there?
Yeah.
Well, we actually had a really good expedition, of course, especially when we went down the Shackleton Glacier. To me, that was the scariest part with all that, because the snow has melted. Usually the crevasses is filled with snow. But sometimes I felt also scary for Anne when we're sailing, and my sled make a big hole in the snow that covered the crevasse, and she was seeing into the dark, so she had to turn and just sail over another place. And at one point where we had only ice, we were pulling one sled, helping each other, because the sled wanted to go into the crevasse. And at one point I slipped and went into a crevasse, but I had cramp, so I hold myself in my elbow. And it was windy, so we could hardly hear each other. And Anne was scared ahead of me, so she was crying, "Don't pull, don't pull." And I said, "Well, I'm in a crevasse." So it was sort of, it was sort of chaos. But, we are very concentrated and do things slowly when it's dangerous. So, and that's, when you're on expedition, that things happen.
Yeah, I think I read about that in your book, and I think you only really realised how dangerous that moment had been when you were safely inside your tent that night, and you were just sort of going over what had happened during the day.
Yeah.
Then you can laugh.
Yeah.
And look, there you are. And I don't know. I mean, it must feel so good to get inside the tent at last after a hard day.
Especially when it's a blizzard. That's cozy to be.
And then doesn't it even take quite a long time to even melt your drinking water?
Yeah.
We spend about 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening melting ice for our water, for food and for drinks, for the day. So it's very time consuming, and it eats up a lot of fuel.
And in those sort of temperatures, does everything work the way it should? I mean, for instance, presumably you have a satellite phone with you. Do you take laptops or anything like that? Does anything work in those sort of temperatures?
The technology is not the greatest in those low temperatures, but so we wear a lot of things down in our lower layers, down our shirt. To warm up batteries. We solarly charge all the camera, the satellite phone, and the laptop to communicate with 3 million children around the world. But it's a challenge, and particularly the photography and the movies. You get the movie camera all set up, and as soon as you wave to leave to start pulling towards you, the camera goes dead.
Yeah.
And you don't have much patience for those things.
No. Well, what about what they call third man syndrome? Did you ever get this feeling that somebody else was around?
I did not.
This is meant to happen to explorers, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we had each other. I think you can get sort of the shadow of that. But we enjoy sort of skiing for 14 hours in a day, single file, very little conversation. The wind and the nylon of your jacket and the whooshing of your skis against the snow is and then the strategy that you're going around in your head. How many miles do we need to make today? Stay on pace to make this a success, or your mind is actually quite full on these expeditions, and so it doesn't really allow for that syndrome, I think, to happen for us anyway, for a whole host of reasons.
What do you think about then? Or are you just counting off miles or counting off hours as you trudge?
I think the hardest days, because we had one day we had kitchen duty, you know, the one that had to melt and serve breakfast and dinner, and the other could lay in the sleeping bag, reading or. But I think that the day I had to make the report, because you had so much time to make a sort of interesting thing for 2-3 minutes. But, you know, your mind is going all over. So it's really hard to, you know, to concentrate on your report. So sometimes we said, will you do my report today? Can you change? So that was, I think that was a sort of a challenge, because it's interesting because you have so much time during the day to be, but it's really hard to be really structured.
Yes, but if you're doing hours and hours of just slogging, as you said, and the people you're bearing in mind all the time are the children, particularly the children who are following your expedition day by day, and almost could you almost feel them willing you on?
They were on our sled. We felt that they were just, you know, pushing or pulling our sled sometimes, because that was really fun to know. Because we communicated and we got questions from students and teachers, so that gave us a lot of energy. That we actually were, you know, teachers back to teachers.
And as I said before, I know it's something you both feel so strongly about. Lovely picture here of an island you reached along the peninsula. I think this is before you actually got to the pole. Beautiful photograph. How did you take it? Who took it?
Well, we get pretty creative with, because there's only 2 of us, sometimes there's the tripod, but this is actually a shot of us after our crossing on the peninsula, as you said, the following year, and we were kayaking in amongst the penguins and the ice floes, and just extraordinary. Another aspect of Antarctica that is just magical.
It is the most amazing scape, isn't it? It's another world completely, isn't it?
It's fantastic.
It's wonderful.
You both love it. You also, there you are again in your tent, and when you're inside your tent, you do have your silly moments. There's a lovely video we've got here that you call Wind Song, and this just shows how 2 grown-up women who should know better can get very silly indeed.
The wind song.
What I have to be living with for 51 days and probably 50 more.
40.
Yeah, but the 40 from the pole and out. We are 10 days left to the pole.
Well, you'll have
Here's the wind song.
You don't like my dance?
This is serious art and she's making fun.
No, I'm being the wind.
Look!
The tent is moving.
Oh,
ever so
thank
softly.
God. It's the music that makes it.
Yeah.
Thank God for these harps.
Yeah. YourExpedition.com. We miss you. And I bet you don't miss us.
And it's interesting there that you're having such a silly moment. But Liv, you just said that was probably one of your hardest days.
Yeah, we called CNN twice a week, and we also realized that we were far behind schedule because we had no wind. So we had discussing the logistics and decided that if we reach the South Pole later than the 17th of January, we will abandon the crossing because we didn't want the rescue operation. So you can see Anne is just taking the satellite phone down, and we were taping the whole conversation. And then because we were just, sort of sad, we just had to do some stupid things. And we had asked the kids to make wind songs and wind dances so they could bring the wind back to Antarctica for us. So that was the story about it.
That's how that started anyway. And I can see on the tent behind you, there are lots of sketchings, or I don't know, it looks like you've been writing something. What's that?
Well, you saw that one picture, the tent and the 2 sleds and the vastness of this remarkable continent, we would write our position reports on the ceiling of our tent in a Sharpie, because if you poked your head out of the tent like you see here, it's one direction looks the same as the next, and the wind might have dusted away your ski tracks from where you came from. So marking our position reports on the ceiling of the tent, and as we're laying there trying to fall asleep in 24 hours of sunlight, we could actually see that we were making progress, although very small in some senses. We were inching our way across this continent, one foot in front of the other, and we were going to do it.
As you get closer and closer to the South Pole, well, either pole actually, what happens to your compass?
It's because the magnetic South Pole is in the ocean between the continent and Australia, so it makes a little bit, it's a little bit dizzy. And it was actually quite misty when we approached the pole, and we were very close to sail just past it. When we just saw some sticks, and I said, well, there's something there, maybe you should check. And suddenly we recognized the pole.
Well, so, I know we're going to get lots of questions from people, so I'm going to ask the obvious one. How do you know when you're there?
It's a huge scientific station. It's the Amundsen Scott base. It's tractors, cars. It's an airstrip. It's a lot of buildings. At that time when we reached it, they started to rebuild the station, and I think now that it looks like a kind of an international airport.
And is there a pole?
There is a pole. So unlike the North Pole, because it sits on the Arctic Ocean, there isn't anything there. When you get to the South Pole, they've put a post there at 90 degrees south, and so we ski up to that, and we're very superstitious, so we touch it again and again and again. We're happy to be there. And there are flags in the background that represent the treaty nations. And, even though it was both of our second time, it's a special place to reach that sort of that pinnacle moment where all the lines of longitude come together at that one little apex. And so we take our pictures like it was the first time. We're anxious to go do the next half of the continent, but we're really happy to have made this. And we squeaked right in. Liv was talking earlier about in the wind song in the tent. And if we had gotten there after the 17th, we would have decided to turn around. And so there was a lot of nervousness at this point because we got there, on the 17th, didn't we, Liv?
Yeah, the night until the 17th. So it was just on time.
Is that because at that point the weather gets too bad to go on?
Yeah, you have to. We didn't want to go halfway across the last portion of the continent and then run out of the summer season and have to call in a rescue. We felt like, one, that's incredibly expensive, but it would tarnish particularly what we were trying to do and what we as women were trying to do. So we would have turned around where there was a way to get out with aircraft rather than to risk other people's lives to come further into the interior away from those safety nets just to get the two of us because we felt like we needed to try.
So once you had gotten there, it's a bit like going up Everest, isn't it? It's not just getting to the top. It's you've got to think about how you get back. And once you've gotten there, how long do you stick around, and when do you decide what is going to happen next? How did you plot your next few days?
Well, because we were delayed coming into the pole because of the lack of the wind, and we had a lot of chocolate left and some soup. So we had when we tell the kids that we had chocolate for breakfast, chocolate for lunch, and for dinner, they think that we were in heaven. But working that hard is not what you want. So we offered a lecture, and then when we got in there, we got a fantastic American breakfast with eggs and bacon and all this stuff. So I still remember that breakfast.
Oh, that must have tasted so good.
And then we left.
And then you left. Now, you then come on to the part where you actually had to decide how you were going to get back. And this is where I don't quite understand, because I'm not an explorer. I don't quite understand. But what happened next? Did you go so far and then determine that you had to actually arrange to be lifted out or meet a boat or something? I know at one point you almost saw it as a failure. What started to go wrong in your view then, anyway?
Well, it was a lack of time. We went all the way over to the continent. We crossed the sort of the landmass of Antarctica and came down to the Ross Shelf. And then the plan was to sail all the way to our ship. But we had this window of 100 days, because then the winter is coming to Antarctica. So we figured out that and there was no wind to sail. So we just had to fly the last miles. And then we felt really disappointed. But
now, can you explain that? Because to me, you've got to the South Pole. Why feel disappointed with anything at that point?
Because we had visualized that we skied all the way to our ship, see the open ocean. It was not far away, but still you have these pictures in your head. And we were talking to kids, and at that point we were sitting, when we were talking to kids in our satellite phone, and they supported us, they comforted us. And then Anne and I remember we were sitting with the satellite phone hearing, and I was crying. I was looking over to Anne, she was crying. And then we decided, why, we should think about what we actually achieved, not, think about the miles that are left. So we decided to do that.
There was a lot of the children, as you've just said, they were the ones that kept you inspired. They were the ones that taught you a lesson that actually nothing about this mission was a failure. You'd done so well, and actually you'd made a difference to their lives as well. And there's a lovely moment in your book where you talk about a little boy called Logan, who came over and leaned over the phone and told you what he really thought and why he thought that your mission was nothing but a success, and that actually what you'd done is inspire him. And I've got my my great nephew, I think he is, to read it for you, because I thought if I read it, it won't sound nearly as good as a young boy reading it. So let's just listen to what Logan said to you that you both said actually changed your world.
I just wanted to tell you that both of you have been real role models to me. Sometimes I have a hard time at school, and I just used to feel like there were lots of things I couldn't do. And now that you guys have done this, I see that I can do anything I put my mind to. You changed my life.
Now, I know, Anne, you immediately said that phone call changed your world. And I think it had that effect on both of you, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're both former teachers. And so, you've had the experience before where young people sort of, they just, in their crystal clear way, they speak what you are trying to teach them. They actually teach you. And it happens every time on an expedition for us. And that was that moment where the two of us were feeling so down, and they hit it, and he especially just hit it right on the nose about the reason we brought 3 million children with us. Only they articulated it far better than we could have ever done it.
It's lovely when a child teaches the teacher, isn't it?
Oh,
Tell me about the new sort of foundation you've set up, the team, and what you're trying to do now in the future.
Well, we've been working these last few years with an international team of women, young women, I have to say, and they come from all the continents except Antarctica, and so we're really trying to raise the voices of young girls around the world up. And we do it through the way we've always done it, and that's through expeditions. And in particular, we've been on water, liquid water, I should say.
Yeah.
And we went down the Ganges River some years back. And I think the most profound part of traveling from the glacier where the Ganges starts in the Himalayas down to the sea was watching our Indian team member and India watching her. And every village and every school that we went into for the 2 months that we were on the water, you could see the kids gravitate to her because they could see themselves in her. And so having an international team of women and traveling around and talking about things that are important to us and trying to engage young people to the issues and the challenges around the world, it's so important to have young women there with us, so that the population that we're talking to can see themselves in what we're doing and in the women we're traveling with.
They sound like an amazing bunch of young women, actually. But it's like you said about your parents at the very beginning. They always gave you the feeling that you could accomplish what you dreamed of. And in a way, that's you're handing that message on to another generation, aren't you?
Yeah, I think so.
Before we move on, actually, let me just ask, because it's very interesting what's happening since the pandemic. We're thinking more about the environment. Even ordinary members of the public are seeing the way our environment has changed accordingly. And maybe we're thinking a bit more about nature. We're looking to the more birds in the trees and thinking like that. But you have been to the north and south of the planet, and you've seen the change in particularly the glaciers that you were talking about, haven't you? It's quite noticeable over the years. You've seen changes.
Especially in the Arctic, it's really dramatic. Greenland, Spitsbergen, the Arctic Ocean, it's the ice is getting thinner and thinner, and when a storm is coming, the ice is breaking up and it's melting much faster. So I think the biggest change we can see is in the Arctic. It's really dramatic.
Yeah, I wonder how it is now. If you were to go there, whether you would see any changes at all. It hasn't been long enough, I suppose, has it?
Well, I think one of the things that struck us when we were heading back up to the Arctic in 2005, and we went through Russia, and in northern Russia, what we did see is the permafrost melting and the heaving of actual buildings, because the ground is changing so dramatically. And when you're able to talk with people who live in the high regions of the north, those changes are dramatic, not just visually, but from a narrative standpoint. And it's we need to sort of give voice to those people, particularly the indigenous peoples around the circumference, far more, because they historically have seen this change.
Yes, they have to live there.
And it's alarming.
Now, we've got ever such a lot of people calling in with questions. Time and again, the questions that are coming up is, what do you eat when you're on your expedition? How do you go to the loo? Well, maybe we don't need to ask you that. Did you ever get really seriously scared and frightened of what you were taking on? Who wants to go with those?
Food. We have breakfast with muesli and oil in, because we need a really heavy. It's impossible to eat when you're at home.
Yeah, I bet.
So your body really urged for fat. So it's milk powder and fat and corn and all of these things. And during the day we have, snacks, bars, nuts, chocolate. And when you come into tent, we have what do you call it? Potato chips. They're big with potato chips. And we had, and every time, because we shared one big, I think it's Pringles it's called, and so because it's vacuum packed. And sometimes they were sometimes we just have to eat it with spoon, and sometimes we could actually take, they were whole. So that was the and then we had the soup, and very late, because it's important to eat at dinner quite late, so that the body can sort of work with that during the night. And that was dried pasta, meat, fish, different things. So the dinners are now pretty well.
How many calories then should you take in? When you're actually on your expedition, how many calories do you aim to take in a day?
It's about 4,000 kilocalories. Yeah,
it's a lot
for women.
For women, and the men need 78,000 more because they have more muscles, so they burn it faster.
So it's got to be very high fat, very high calorie, and eating all the time, I presume.
No, we stopped every hour to have to drink and a little snack, just to have the body working so many hours.
Now, to your relationship with Viking, the whole idea of expedition cruises, expedition journeys, you two are going to be godmothers to 2 new Viking ships, which are going to take this whole idea of this sort of experience on. You must be very excited, both of you, about this.
Oh, very honored to be a part of the Viking family, absolutely.
It's the idea. I mean, I love the idea of not having to do what you do, which is, trekking, slogging away with all of that behind me, just in order to be able to see the Arctic or the Antarctic, or at least something like that. And that's what these expedition ships are being built to do, to actually, I suppose, go in some luxury, but to be able to see a lot of what you see.
Yeah, and they will also have scientists on board. They will have a laboratory, so we can just be together with the scientists. So I think that's really exciting. They could be, we are allowed to kayak, to ski if you want. So you might come and, try to pull a sled.
Yes, if you really wanted to, I suppose, absolutely. Let's have a little look at this video where we see Torsten Hagen, who is introducing his audience to the whole idea of these expedition cruises. And he actually said that he was talked into going and seeing for himself what he might be able to make other people see. Have a look at this.
This summer, Karina talked me and some of my colleagues into going there. I don't know what this picture looks like, but we went there, so I have evidence I've been there, and I think I'm very glad I went, because it's one of the more fantastic experiences I've had. I'm sure Svalbard isn't always like this, but you can see the weather was perfect. Perfect. And we were here with one of the ribs. Of course, we had hoped to see, we saw reindeer, but we didn't see polar bears. It doesn't always happen that you see polar bears, but they are there. And the week before we had been there, our photographer, Alistair, had been there, and he took this picture. So that's for real. It's not compliment of Getty's, it's compliment of Alistair's.
Anne and Liv, I haven't asked you about wildlife. Do you get to see much wildlife when you're slogging away to one or other pole?
Not in Antarctica, but on our attempts to ski to the North Pole, we were, especially from Russia, we were followed by polar bears, and that was pretty scary because we had these pack ice, and sometimes we couldn't see, and it was coming behind us. And once we really had to scare it away with a flare shot. So. And you, Anne, on your North Pole Expedition 86, I don't know what you saw.
Yeah, the North Pole, you see, you're usually lucky to see perhaps some white wolves closer to land before you get further out onto the ice. Fox, Arctic fox, and then you get further out in the ice, it's primarily just the polar bear. Antarctica, we wouldn't get the payoff of the animals, the wonderful wildlife that exists down there until the very end, when we were about to get on our ship and a penguin waddled by. But so, because the interior, there are no animals. They need the food source of the ocean
Of the
to
ocean, of course.
assist. So you have to be very patient and wait 97 days.
Yes, that's right. You've got to get to the edge to be able to see the penguins. But as you say, what a wonderful payoff. We've got another little clip of Thorstein Hagen talking here at the same conference because he said how important it was to have you two future godmothers in the audience. Let's just hear him saying that.
So we have Anne Bancroft and Liv Arnesen. Could I shine light on you? And can you stand up? Can you stand up? And I had to be careful with the words I use now, but I've been told that Anne was the first woman to be both on the North Pole and the South Pole. And better you than me. And Liv was the first woman to go solo to the South Pole. And together, they were the first women to cross the Antarctic continent. If I got some commas wrong, because they have so long resumes, but from my simple mind, it's fantastically privileged to have you as godmothers. So thank you in advance.
For me, who's never been particularly interested in, being a polar explorer, I think what is fascinating about, I think Thorstein Hagen's vision, which you are going to enable him to do, is that people will actually, instead of just going to the Caribbean or just going on holiday somewhere hot or whatever, they will be able to see a part of the world that most people have never seen and never would.
Yeah, I think what's lovely about Viking, no matter where they go, whether it's the polar regions or Europe or wherever, I mean, they enhance that sense. I think that we know very well, which is, you have a sense of curiosity. It doesn't end at the age of 12. We're lifelong learners, and that is such fun, and it's such an adventure to see all parts of the wonderful globe that we live on, and Viking enables so many people to do that in, as you said, a very nice way. And
absolutely,
we're very honored to be a part of that.
Maybe not at the tent, but at least we'll be able to get some idea of what you do and what you see. Let's go to a few more questions then, because as I said, we've got so many coming in. Oh, right. Okay. Margaret Wang from Colombia. Hi there, Margaret. Which environment is more challenging or more inhospitable, the Arctic and the North Pole or the South Pole?
It's
the Arctic is probably, and of course it has to do with season, but the Arctic being on an ocean, we're traveling on the Arctic Ocean. It's very, very unpredictable. You're being moved around by the currents and the wind. The ice opens up, it closes up, and so it's a crazy dance floor, and never a dull moment. And it can be, in some ways, very scary. But they're both extraordinary places.
Here's a very good one, which might have to be one that we end on, since I've been talking to you for a full hour already. Jeff Donfeld from Malibu says, upon your return, did your relationship with each other, with friends, colleagues, relatives, change because of what you've been through? And I think you've both said in your book, haven't you, that there's no doubt your expeditions did change you. Liv first.
Did it? Well, I think at least when we realize that we will become friends for life, Anne and I, and continue. And of course, when you are such a big project, you also realize what is important in life and what is not important. What you should spend your life or your time to. I think I learned that when I went ski solo too, but I think it's coming stronger. What do you really want to get out of your life?
Anne?
Well, I think, my relationship with Liv each year gets deeper and deeper. It's been a grand adventure for 20 years, and I feel so lucky not every explorer, I have to say, comes away with a lifelong sister. So we're extremely fortunate in that regard. Sometimes expeditions split the team apart rather than bring it together. And I've got my best friend right there on the other side of the pond.
And actually, you were planning to be with each other at the moment, weren't you?
Yeah, we were supposed to be together planning.
What are you planning? Really? Another big expedition?
We're old, but we're not done.
Oh no, you're definitely not too old. I'm sure. I think we're all about the same age. So let's, yes, nothing will stop you, I'm sure. It's been an absolute privilege and pleasure to talk to you. I can't tell you how exciting it's been. And I have loved every word of your book. I haven't been able to read it all because I only got it a few days ago, but just cherry picking some of the best bits. It's been really, really exciting to read it. So thank you so much. It's been wonderful meeting you. Absolutely wonderful. And I look forward to you being godmothers of those 2 ships and seeing where you go and the sorts of adventures you can go on those too. That'll be quite something. You're looking forward to that. Do you know what it's like to be a godmother?
No. Well, it is really exciting to be a godmother on the Viking cruises because Viking invited us in January to Los Angeles, and so that was a fantastic. So
that's the last time you've seen each other, is it?
Yeah.
In January.
Yeah.
Oh well, I'm sure it won't be too long now. And it will be very exciting, yeah. And I don't think being a godmother is anywhere near as scary or dangerous as what you've been through. I think you'll thoroughly enjoy it. Thank you so much, Anne and Liv, for being with me today. That is really stupendous. Thank you very much indeed. And anyone watching, if you want to see any more about how they are designing and building Viking ships, particularly those new expedition ships, you'll be able to find lots of videos here on Viking Television. Go to the main page and look for Explorers Week. It's all there. It's absolutely fascinating, some of the videos about how the designers even design the ships to be different because they're going to fulfill slightly different purposes. Anyway, like I say, it's all there and it's worth exploring the Viking.TV pages. Now, let me tell you about next week's interview. Norwegian national treasure and godmother to Viking Jupiter is Sissel. She's considered one of the world's top sopranos, and her extraordinary talent has earned her a Grammy nomination. She's gained praise and recognition for her angelic and really amazingly powerful voice. She's collaborated with people like Placido Domingo and even the American rapper Warren G. There are very few genres that Sissel hasn't done. You might also recognize her voice actually from movies like Titanic and Lord of the Rings. Have a look at our cultural partners page somewhere around here, cultural partners, and you'll see her there too. In the meantime, please keep safe and well, and I'll be with you next week too. Don't forget Lady Carnarvon's going to be with you from Highclere Castle, the real Downton Abbey, at this time tomorrow. So there's always something to watch. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining me today, and I'll see you again next week. And in the meantime, please stay safe. Bye-bye.